We are in a situation where we're expecting the Prime Minister to lose this vote. I mean, lots of debate about how much she loses the vote by. I've got the question I put to Sammy Wilson from the DUP a little bit earlier. Does it matter how much she loses this vote by? Does that affect what's going to happen immediately after the vote?
I think the scale of the defeat, and I don't think we should take anything for granted. MPs will go in there. I'm sure vast majority will appraise this on the risks and the benefits as they see it. But the scale will affect what the Prime Minister chooses to do next. Now, I'm not going to get into the fool's errand of trying to predict precisely what that would be, but I think what MPs should do, certainly in my view, is look at this deal. In my view, it's a bad deal. £39 billion your listeners are handing over. We don't get a free trade deal with the EU. We don't get control over our laws, our borders, and our trade policy. And I think we should just play this very straight. It's a bad deal for the country, and Britain could do better.
Britain could do better, and perhaps many people argue it could have done better if we'd had a different Prime Minister, one who had been a Leave campaigner and a true believer themselves, as opposed to someone who thought this was a problem to sort of be overcome as opposed to an opportunity. But we are where we are. Where do we go from here? The EU say they're not going to renegotiate. There's no majority for anything else in Parliament. Are we now just stuck in stalemate until the 29th of March and then we leave with no deal, but without the proper preparations for it? What happens next?
Well, I think the EU are notorious for playing hardball, going right up to the wire, but I think we should continue to keep the arm of friendship and the negotiations at least open, keep talking to them, keep trying to remedy a bad deal. But ultimately, in law, in primary legislation, we leave the EU on the 29th of March. MPs have already passed that legislation. They would have to reverse that legislation, and that could only happen now, realistically, in practice, if the Prime Minister supported that reversal, and I'm sure she won't. So I think we'll leave the EU on the end of March, and I think the preparations for leaving on WTO terms need to be accelerated and intensified. And there would be some risk. I think you're right about that, but that risk is manageable. What is not manageable, what is devastating long term for this country, economically and democratically, is signing up to the deal before us.
Look, I'm certainly in agreement with you that I think this deal is actually, again, if there's a choice between this deal and Remain, I'd happily vote Remain. At least we've still got the intent, the ability to leave unilaterally. However, Theresa May yesterday, she's speaking in the House of Commons, speaking in Stoke-on-Trent earlier the day, she said very interesting forms of words. She said, our intent, our commitment is to leave on March the 29th. She said, I don't believe that Article 50 should be delayed. That is not the same as saying categorically, I will not allow this to happen. There are a lot of fears that the Remain campaigners within Parliament are going to try and seize control of procedures. We've already seen that Speaker John Bercow is very much on their side and willing to act in a partial rather than impartial manner. And there are a lot of fears that the Remainers within Cabinet will be forcing the Prime Minister's hand and that she will effectively end Brexit, or certainly try to delay Brexit. What happens then?
Well, I think there's all sorts of shenanigans that are going on, but the EU Withdrawal Act makes it clear we leave on the 29th of March, and that would require a separate piece of legislation, a separate statute to reverse it. And even if the Dominic Raab approach was adopted by Parliament, and I've got my doubts about whether it would be, and even if they tried from the back benches to pass law reversing Brexit, there's at least 2 or 3 pinch points which require the Prime Minister to support it for it to happen, and I think she'll be true to her word. So I think that there'll be a lot of noise off stage, if you like, but the reality is MPs have already set through legislation the track to leave the EU. We should continue to try and get a good deal with the EU, but we shouldn't allow them to delay, frustrate or scupper Brexit.
Do you share the fears that many are expressing that forces are being unleashed and a level of anger is going to be unleashed if there is an attempt to actually stop Brexit from being enacted, or a second referendum being called, and that people who feel they weren't listened to for many years, indeed many decades, who got to have their say in 2016 and who were told not just ahead of the referendum but after the referendum and ahead of the general election in 2017 that they had been listened to and their vote would be implemented. Hey, there was even a £9 million leaflet sent to us telling it would be implemented. Do you fear that if we do see attempts to actually stop Brexit from happening, to delay it even further, bearing in mind we're already 3 years down the line, that we could see forces being unleashed in this country which perhaps people will live to rue the day on?
Well, I'd be a bit careful with my language about this, but I certainly think it would be a cliff edge for public trust in the democratic system if we give the people a vote, and whether you are Leave or Remain, Labour or Conservative, even Lib Dem, all the Lib Dems said this at the time as well, and we say we respect the verdict. To allow that to unravel, I think, would be a breach of public trust on a scale that we haven't seen before. So there's all sorts of considerations on the technical detail of the 580 odd pages of this withdrawal agreement, but there's one cardinal rule of British politics: keep your promises, and we all as MPs need to do that today.
Well, what happens if the Prime Minister, you were one of those who voted against in the leadership ballot in terms of the confidence within the party against the Prime Minister, but obviously in a vote of confidence in the House of Commons, you and almost every Tory MP will support the Prime Minister. But what if she does move in that direction to actually delaying Brexit under the pretence of more negotiations, possibly moving to a second referendum? Would you then withdraw your support from her government?
Oh, I'll use all my power and my abilities to get the Prime Minister. I've always wanted this, to deliver the best Brexit for Britain. What I won't do is support a Jeremy Corbyn vote of no confidence that could lead to a hard left Labour government. Just don't think that the risks of that are something that we should contemplate.
And yet, the risk to the Conservatives, to your fellow MPs, if you do not deliver Brexit, 70% of Tory voters are Brexiteers, huge percentage, of course, of the party as well, a party membership. If you don't deliver Brexit, that is very likely to lead to an absolute collapse of the Tory vote at the next general election, whenever it is, and we'll see a Jeremy Corbyn government anyway.
I certainly think, particularly under this deal, which leaves us unable to exit the so-called backstop, or really is the regulatory clutches of the EU, and we would then go into the next election continuing this tortuous haggle with Brussels. And I think that would be hugely damaging for Conservatives in the next election, but even more important, I think it would be damaging for the country. So the answer is, let's deliver Brexit, let's get this behind us, let's rally behind the Conservative government, behind an optimistic agenda, and let's take the game to Jeremy Corbyn. I'm not sure we're going to be really in a position to do that until we get Brexit behind us, and we won't do that until we properly deliver on the promises we all made.
Okay, just finally, Dominic Raab, I'm a Brexiteer, you're a Brexiteer. Can I start planning my party on the 29th of March? I've asked a lot of Brexiteers this. Or should I make sure I've got a returnable deposit?
I think you should always continue your parties, Julia. I hear they're very good. I'd love an invitation. I think as a politician, of course, sober assessment of where we are, I want to just make sure we hold our nerve, not popping the corks, equally not throwing up my hands in despair, and make sure we chart a steady, responsible course to keeping our promises and delivering not just on Brexit, but the opportunities of Brexit for this country.